The wind was eerily still that evening when David and Michael arrived near the ancient graveyard. The walls were cracked, the trees dead, and yet something about the place whispered to David's soul, "You sure we should be here?" Michael asked, nervously glancing around. David didn't answer. His eyes were locked on a particular grave, number 40, half buried in moss. The name etched in faded letters was Elena. "It's calling me," David whispered. "Don't be ridiculous," Michael muttered, stepping back, but David had already knelt down, brushing the dirt from the headstone. As his fingers touched the stone, a cold gust of wind passed through both of them. That night, David dreamt of her, a pale woman in a white dress, standing near the grave. Her voice echoed in his ears. "Was buried alive. Help me. Give me justice." In the following days, David became obsessed with the name Elena. He started researching, visiting town archives, questioning old residents. He discovered that Elena had died under mysterious circumstances decades ago, accused of witchcraft by a powerful landowner named Robert Matthews, a local priest Father Samuel, and the village herbalist Dr. Jonathan Cross, but rumors said she was innocent. And her soul had never rested. One by one, David tracked them, or their descendants, and strange things began to happen. Elena's voice grew louder in his dreams. "I'm still here. I was wronged." David shared everything with Michael, who began to suspect that Elena's death wasn't just tragic, it was murder. Then, one evening, they returned to the grave. As David placed a candle by the headstone, the earth beneath trembled. And Elena's voice was no longer a whisper. That night, David couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, Elena's pale face floated in the darkness, her mouth whispering something he couldn't quite understand. In the morning, Michael found David sitting on the edge of his bed, eyes red from fatigue. "She was buried alive," David muttered. "She said it again. She needs justice." "You're losing your mind," Michael snapped. "It's just a dream, man. We shouldn't go back there." But David was already pulling on his coat. "I'm going back to the graveyard." Michael sighed. He didn't want to go, but he knew David wouldn't listen. When they reached grave 40, David sat silently beside it. The cold wind had returned, circling them like a living thing. Suddenly, he spoke. "Elena. I'm here. What do you want me to do?" The wind stopped. The trees stood still. And then a whisper filled the air, like a voice coming from beneath the ground. "Robert Matthews. Father Samuel. Dr. Cross. They sealed my fate." David's heart pounded. The names echoed in his head. "They're all dead," Michael said quickly. "If it's revenge she wants, there's nothing we can do." "But their bloodline lives," David said. That evening, David began to research their descendants. Robert Matthews' grandson, Andrew Matthews, lived in a big house on the edge of town. Father Samuel's church still operated under his nephew, Eli, and Dr. Jonathan Cross had a granddaughter named Rebecca Cross, now a well-known herbalist. One by one, David visited them. Andrew Matthews laughed at the mention of Elena. "That old legend? My grandfather said she cursed our family. But he was a madman." But that night, Andrew died, heart attack, no warning. When David heard the news, his hands trembled. "It's begun," he whispered. Michael grew more afraid with every passing day. "David. We need to stop. This isn't justice anymore, it's a curse." But David was beyond stopping. Elena's voice haunted him every hour. At midnight, David lit 3 candles beside the grave and placed the names of the 3 families around it. "Justice or vengeance?" he asked aloud, and Elena's voice replied, soft and clear, "Truth." Michael had started keeping his distance from David. The strange dreams, the obsession with Elena, and the sudden death of Andrew Matthews had shaken him deeply. He didn't say it aloud, but David knew. Michael was afraid. One evening, David received a phone call. It was from a woman. Her voice was soft, uncertain. "Is this David? I found your number from the town archive. You're researching Elena?" David sat up. "Yes." "Who is this?" "My name is Rebecca Cross. My grandfather was Dr. Jonathan Cross. You asked about him last week at the library." David's heart skipped a beat. "Yes. I remember. "You're a herbalist, right?" "Yes," she replied, "and I think we need to talk. In private." They agreed to meet at a small cafe near the edge of town. When David arrived, Rebecca was already seated, a folder in her hand. She looked nervous. "I went through my grandfather's notes," she said quietly. "And there's something you need to see." She opened the folder and pulled out a yellow journal. Handwritten notes filled the pages: treatments, herbs, patient names, and one entry, marked with a red circle: Elena. 1943, unjustly accused. Symptoms do not match demonic possession. Forced testimony. Refused treatment. Regret remains. David's hands trembled as he read the words. He knew. He knew she wasn't possessed. Rebecca nodded. And he didn't speak up. Out of fear. Father Samuel and Robert Matthews had influence. They forced the trial. My grandfather remained silent. And she died. David closed his eyes. Elena's voice echoed again in his mind. "Give me truth." Rebecca leaned in. "She's still here, isn't she?" David opened his eyes. "Yes. And I think she's finally being heard." Elena's grave no longer felt silent. At night, the wind around it hummed softly, like a voice trying to speak. David lit candles at the site every night now. He no longer feared the graveyard. He felt closer to her there than anywhere else. One night, as he sat by her grave, a shadow passed behind him. He turned quickly. No one. But then he heard it, not a whisper. A cry, a woman's weeping, and this time, it wasn't in his dream. The next morning, Michael showed up at David's doorstep, tired, pale, and clearly disturbed. "I saw her," he said without greeting. David looked up. "In a dream?" Michael shook his head. "No. Awake. Last night. Outside my window. A woman in white. Crying." David stood still. "She looked right at me," Michael continued, voice shaking. "And then she disappeared." David motioned for him to sit. "She's not here to harm us, Michael. She's asking to be heard." Michael looked away. "I don't know anymore, man. This whole thing. It's getting out of control." Just then, David's phone buzzed, a message from Father Eli, the nephew of Father Samuel, inviting David to meet him at the old church. The church was silent and cold when David arrived. Father Eli greeted him with a heavy face. "I knew this day would come," he said quietly. "The day someone would ask about Elena." David sat down in one of the pews. "She was buried alive, wasn't she?" he asked softly. Father Eli nodded slowly. "My uncle, Father Samuel, he believed she was possessed. But she was just a girl, misunderstood, perhaps cursed by the village's fear." He handed David an old wooden cross. This belonged to her. She clutched it tightly as they dragged her to the trial. David ran his fingers over the cracked surface. "She was never truly dead when they buried her," Father Eli whispered. "My uncle confessed it on his deathbed. She had fainted, they thought it was the demon escaping." David felt his breath catch in his chest. That night, back at the graveyard, David placed the wooden cross at the base of Elena's headstone. "I know now," he said aloud. "And I swear, I'll tell the world." The wind stirred gently. Michael, standing a few feet away, suddenly whispered, "Look." From the center of the grave, a faint light began to rise, soft, white, like mist catching the moonlight. And in that light, for a brief second, Elena stood, eyes closed, hands folded, a tear running down her cheek. She vanished as suddenly as she appeared. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The following day, David returned to the library to dig deeper. The more he uncovered, the more twisted the truth became. Old trial records revealed that Elena had been accused not just by Robert Matthews and Father Samuel, but also by 3 other townspeople, all of whom had died mysteriously within a year of her burial. It was almost as if the curse had started long ago and was still unfolding. As David read, his phone buzzed. A message from Rebecca Cross. "I found something in the church basement. You need to see this. Tonight." That night, David and Michael met Rebecca behind the church. She led them down a narrow staircase into a musty basement filled with old crates and cobwebs. She handed David a dusty wooden box, inside, old rosaries, a rusted dagger, and a sealed envelope. David opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, handwritten by Father Samuel. To whoever reads this, I was wrong. She was innocent. I saw no evil, only fear. Fear we planted ourselves. May God forgive me. David looked up, his voice heavy. They all knew. They let her die anyway. Michael was silent, staring at the dagger. What's this? He asked. Rebecca replied, it's ceremonial. Used in old purification rituals. But some believe it binds souls if misused. David's eyes narrowed. You think they used this on Elena? Rebecca nodded. To silence her spirit. But it didn't work. Back at the graveyard, David placed the dagger and letter on Elena's grave. The candlelight flickered violently. Suddenly, the earth beneath them pulsed, a subtle but powerful vibration. Michael stepped back. What was that? David didn't move. She's waking, he said. Piece by piece. The truth is pulling her back. The air grew colder, and this time, they didn't hear just Elena's voice. They heard many, soft whispers rising from the soil, all speaking the same word, justice. David turned to Michael and Rebecca. We're not just hearing Elena now. There are others. Rebecca stood frozen, her eyes wide. Others? She whispered. You mean other souls? David nodded slowly. This place. It holds more than just Elena's grief. It holds buried guilt, generations of it. Michael stepped back toward the graveyard's iron gate. I don't want to be part of this anymore. This is beyond us now. But as he turned to leave, the wind howled, loud, sharp, angry. The gate slammed shut behind him, even though no one touched it. Michael flinched. David stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. She doesn't want us to leave. Not yet. That night, none of them slept. Rebecca stayed at David's apartment, surrounded by Elena's notes, the old letter, and maps of the town. She traced a symbol found on the dagger to an old manuscript, a binding ritual, once used to suppress voices of the dead. It's not just about killing someone, she explained. It's about erasing them. Their memory. Their truth. Michael paced the room. So, what they did to Elena wasn't just murder. It was spiritual silencing. David looked down at the cross Elena once held. They tried to bury her story. Rebecca added, but every time someone learns a piece of the truth, the silence breaks a little. They decided to return to the graveyard once more, this time, with candles, the journal, the dagger, and the letter. As they lit the candles around grave 40, the ground trembled again, but this time, the whispers were clearer. I remember. I remember the fire. The screams. The lies. Rebecca read the letter aloud beside the grave. David held the cross up high. Michael stood in silence, eyes closed, and then the earth opened, not violently, but gently. A narrow crack appeared before the grave, and out of it, a beam of cold white light rose upward. Within the light, they saw faces, faint, shadowy, but full of sorrow. Elena stood at the front, her hands reaching outward. She wasn't crying anymore. She was waiting. David whispered, we're not just witnesses anymore. We're part of this now. Rebecca's voice shook. What do we do next? Michael stepped forward, surprisingly calm. We finish what they started. And we free them. The following day was overcast. Heavy gray clouds loomed over the town, and the air felt unusually dense, as if nature itself was holding its breath. David, Rebecca, and Michael met at the church once again. They had gathered everything, Elena's journal pages, the dagger, the cross, the names of all those who had wronged her. Rebecca opened a large, dusty book she had borrowed from the monastery's private collection. It was written in Old Latin, but she had translated the ritual needed to release a bound soul. It must be done where the soul rests, she said. And it requires 3 witnesses, one from faith, one from blood, and one from truth. David looked at her. You are her blood. You're related to one of the men who wronged her. Rebecca nodded. And you. Your truth. You uncovered the story. Spoke it aloud. Michael hesitated. Then, I guess that makes me Faith? Rebecca smiled faintly. You still believe she deserves peace. That's enough. That night, they returned to grave 401 last time. The air was still. The wind had vanished. They placed candles in a triangle. Rebecca stood at the head of the grave, holding the dagger. David placed the cross in the center. Michael read aloud the confession of Father Samuel, his voice steady. As the ritual began, the ground beneath them shivered. Soft glowing light seeped from the soil, and slowly, Elena emerged, not as a ghost, not as a shadow, but as a form of pure, white light. She stood before them, no longer in sorrow, but in silence. Rebecca spoke, "We release you, Elena, you were wronged, you are remembered, you are free." Elena raised her hand, not in warning, not in pain, but in thanks, and then, she faded into the air. Silence returned. The grave no longer trembled. The whispers stopped. Only peace remained. Michael exhaled. It's over. David looked to the stars above. No, he said. It's just begun. Now we tell the world. Rebecca touched Elena's journal, now closed beside the cross. She'll never be forgotten again. Days passed. The graveyard grew still. No more whispers. No more weeping shadows. David, Michael, and Rebecca visited grave 401 last time, not with fear, but with flowers. Rebecca knelt and placed a white lily near the headstone. She's really gone now, she said softly. Michael looked around. The air feels different. Lighter. David nodded. She's at peace. And so are the others. But peace did not mean forgetting. David published a full article in the town's historical journal, revealing Elena's story, the confessions, and the hidden truth behind her wrongful burial. He didn't name names for revenge, only to make the truth known. Rebecca donated her grandfather's journal and Father Samuel's letter to the local archive, labeling them, in memory of the forgotten. Michael returned to his quiet life but carried a new kind of faith, not in religion, but in listening to the voices that history silences. One evening, months later, David visited the grave again, alone this time. The cemetery was calm. Birds chirped. Trees swayed gently. He sat by the stone and whispered, "Elena, you taught me something, not just about death, but about silence. And how dangerous it is." A warm breeze passed over him, not cold, not heavy, just soft, like a gentle hand brushing his face. David smiled. He stood, placed the last white candle on the grave, and walked away, without looking back. The grave remained still, and for the first time in 80 years, it was finally silent. 1 month had passed since the night Elena was released, but David felt the weight of something unfinished. His dreams returned, but they were no longer haunted by Elena. Now, he saw new faces, frightened, angry, forgotten. One night, he awoke in cold sweat, hearing a voice whisper, "She was the first." But not the only. David sat upright in bed. Were there more souls bound like Elena? The next day, he went back to the town archive and began searching for names of those who had died around the same time as Elena. He found 4 unmarked graves near the south edge of the cemetery. No names, no records, just simple stones. He brought this to Rebecca. "I think they were victims too," he said. "Connected somehow." Silenced like Elena. Rebecca looked troubled. "Then we need to find out who they were." Together, they dug deeper, through old town letters, church logs, and whispered village tales. They found partial names: Margaret, a widow labeled a witch; Elias, a mute man accused of curses; Nora, a healer whose medicines failed a rich family; Thomas, a child born with a birthmark feared as a demonic sign. David clenched his jaw. They were all feared. All punished. All buried without justice. That night, they stood near the southern stones, candles lit again, no wind. No voices. David whispered each name slowly, one by one. Suddenly, the candles flickered, violently, and then a scream, not from above, but from below. Rebecca gasped. "They're awake." David couldn't sleep that night. He knew now, the graveyard's curse hadn't ended, it had just begun. Elena's story had only opened the first door. There were others, forgotten by time, silenced by fear. David, Rebecca, and Michael formed a pact. "We will uncover every story, we will speak every name, we will give voice to the dead. Weeks passed. Every time they uncovered a new soul story, the whispers in the graveyard would fade, and a strange, peaceful silence would take its place. The town began to change. People spoke openly about the past, superstitions were questioned, memorials were built. The graveyard, once a place of terror, became a place of remembrance. One final night, David walked alone to the edge of the cemetery. He lit a single candle and placed it before the last unnamed grave. He whispered, "You are known, you are heard, you are not forgotten." And with that, the wind blew gently past him, not cold, not angry, just peaceful. He turned back toward town, knowing this chapter was closed, but the echoes of the past would guide him forever.